The dollar just lost ground in 5 economies this year, and if you're getting your news from mainstream outlets, you probably didn't even notice it happening. We're not talking about some fringe nations experimenting with alternatives. We're talking about Brazil, Russia, the UAE, Thailand, and Bangladesh, economies that collectively represent over 400 million people and $4.70 trillion in GDP. And here's the part that should make you pause. This didn't happen because of sanctions or some dramatic announcement or a global summit. It happened quietly, methodically, and in a way that suggests something far more permanent than what most analysts are willing to admit. Let me be clear about what I mean by replaced. I'm not saying the dollar disappeared overnight in these places. I'm saying that China successfully established yuan-based payment systems, currency swap lines, and trade settlement mechanisms that fundamentally altered how these economies conduct major transactions. The dollar is still there, but it's no longer the only option, and in some sectors, it's no longer even the preferred option. Here's what nobody tells you about currency dominance. It doesn't collapse in a spectacular crash. It erodes slowly, transaction by transaction. And if you want to understand what's really happening right now, you need to look at 3 interconnected systems that China activated this year with surgical precision. The first system is what I call the infrastructure trap. Most people think infrastructure is about roads and bridges, but China's infrastructure play is actually about creating economic dependencies that naturally lead to currency adoption. Let me show you the numbers that matter. In Thailand, Chinese companies didn't just build the high-speed rail connecting Bangkok to the northern provinces. They structured the financing, maintenance contracts, and even the training programs in yuan-denominated agreements. The total project value? 179 billion baht, but here's the critical part. 62% of the ongoing operational costs are settled directly in yuan through the China-Thailand currency swap line, established in 2023. I talked to a logistics coordinator in Bangkok last month who put it simply, we used to convert everything to dollars first, then to yuan to pay Chinese contractors. Now we just use yuan directly. It's faster and cheaper, faster and cheaper. Those 2 words are doing more to shift currency preferences than any government mandate ever could. But Thailand isn't even the most dramatic example. Look at what happened in Brazil this year. Brazilian soybean exporters, the people feeding China's massive agricultural needs, started pricing contracts directly in yuan. We're talking about $40 billion in annual trade that used to flow through dollar intermediaries. By June 2024, yuan-denominated trade between Brazil and China jumped to 53% of their bilateral transactions, up from 23% just 18 months ago. This is the paradox that Western analysts keep missing. Brazil has one of the most sophisticated financial systems in the developing world. They're not abandoning the dollar because they lack alternatives. They're choosing yuan settlement because it offers concrete advantages in their largest trade relationship. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When your biggest customer offers you a payment system that eliminates currency conversion costs, reduces transaction time from 3 days to 8 hours, and doesn't run through SWIFT where it can be monitored or potentially disrupted, you take it. Ideology doesn't pay the bills, efficiency does. The infrastructure trap works because it creates what economists call ecosystem lock-in. Once the rails are Chinese built, the rolling stock is Chinese made, the maintenance crews are Chinese trained, and the financing is yuan denominated, switching back isn't just expensive, it's functionally impossible without rebuilding the entire system. And this is just the first layer. The second system is even more sophisticated, and it's the one that makes most Western analysts completely miss what's actually happening. It's not about replacing the dollar everywhere. It's about strategically carving out specific sectors where yuan dominance can be established quickly and defended permanently. Stay with me because what comes next explains why this shift is accelerating, not slowing down. So here's the second force at work, and this one operates completely differently. I call it the commodity anchor strategy. While everyone's been obsessing over whether the yuan can become a global reserve currency, which honestly is the wrong question entirely, China's been doing something far more practical. They've been linking yuan usage directly to commodities that countries absolutely need and cannot easily substitute. And in 2024, they accelerated this to a degree that caught even seasoned currency traders off guard. Let's talk about what happened in the UAE, because this is where you see the strategy in its purest form. The UAE isn't some economically desperate nation looking for alternatives. This is a financial hub with deep ties to Western banking systems, a country that pegs its own currency to the dollar. So why did yuan-denominated oil transactions through Abu Dhabi increase by 340% between January and September 2024? Here's what most people think. Oh, it's about Russia sanctions and finding workarounds. Wrong. That's the lazy analysis. What's actually happening is that China offered UAE energy companies something the dollar system couldn't match: immediate convertibility into physical assets and guaranteed demand contracts. When a UAE oil producer sells to China in yuan, those yuan aren't just sitting in an account somewhere. They're immediately deployable into Chinese technology imports, construction contracts, or convertible into gold through the Shanghai Gold Exchange without ever touching dollars. A senior energy trader told me off the record, the dollar gave us liquidity, the yuan gives us certainty. When you're planning long-term energy infrastructure, certainty wins. Let me show you what this actually means with specific numbers. The UAE-China crude oil deal signed in March 2024 involves 650,000 barrels per day for 5 years, entirely in yuan. That's roughly $17.40 billion annually at current prices. But here's the kicker. The contract included automatic rollover provisions into Chinese renewable energy projects in the UAE. The yuan earned from oil sales could flow directly into Chinese-built solar installations without currency conversion. This is the part that should terrify dollar dominance advocates. China's not just offering an alternative payment method, they're offering an entire closed-loop economic ecosystem where yuan enters through commodity sales and exits through infrastructure purchases, never needing to convert to dollars at any point in the cycle. Now let's jump to Bangladesh, because this is where the model gets refined for smaller economies. Bangladesh isn't an oil power or a commodity giant. They're a manufacturing economy heavily dependent on textile exports and energy imports. Traditional analysis would say they have zero incentive to move away from dollars, but by August 2024, 31% of Bangladesh's bilateral trade with China was settling in yuan. Why? Because China linked yuan usage directly to something Bangladesh desperately needed: liquefied natural gas at stable prices. When I was reviewing trade data last month, I found something fascinating. Bangladesh signed a 10-year LNG supply agreement with Chinese energy companies where pricing is fixed in yuan terms, not dollar terms. For a country that's been hammered by energy price volatility, remember the blackouts in 2022 and 23? This is transformative. The deal works like this. Bangladesh pays in yuan for guaranteed LNG supplies. Those yuan come from their garment exports to China, which Chinese importers are now incentivized to pay for in yuan because it simplifies their own accounting. The entire trade relationship essentially becomes yuan denominated by mutual convenience. Here's what matters. This isn't about China forcing adoption. It's about China creating conditions where yuan usage solves real problems that dollar-based systems either can't or won't address. Most people think currency dominance is about military power or economic size, but here's what's really happening. Currency adoption is about solving practical problems for the people actually conducting transactions. The dollar became dominant because it was convenient and trusted. The yuan is gaining ground in specific corridors because it's becoming more convenient for specific purposes. And this connects to something even bigger, something that reveals why this shift is remarkably resilient even when global conditions change. The third system isn't about trade at all. It's about something far more permanent, and it's the reason why reversing these trends would require changes that Western policymakers aren't even discussing yet. The third system is what I call the digital payment fortress, and this is where China's strategy moves from clever to genuinely revolutionary. Here's what the mainstream narrative gets wrong. They keep analyzing this through the lens of traditional banking and SWIFT alternatives. But what China built in 24 isn't just a competitor to SWIFT, it's an entirely different architecture that bypasses the need for the correspondent banking system that makes dollars essential in the first place. Let me show you the numbers that nobody's talking about. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, processed 134.5 trillion yuan in 2023. But in just the first 8 months of 2024, that figure hit 156.3 trillion yuan. We're looking at roughly 45% annual growth in a system that directly competes with dollar-based settlement. But here's where it gets really interesting. CIPS isn't just handling transactions between Chinese banks and foreign banks anymore. It's now integrated with domestic payment systems in all 5 countries we're discussing: Brazil, Russia, UAE, Thailand, and Bangladesh. What does that integration actually mean? It means a business in Sao Paulo can pay a supplier in Shenzhen directly through their local Brazilian bank using an app that looks exactly like any other payment interface. The currency conversion, the routing, the settlement, all of it happens invisibly in the background. No SWIFT code, no correspondent bank taking a cut. No 3-day settlement window. Transaction time, 11 seconds on average, according to data from Brazil's central bank published in July 2024. Cost, approximately 0.3% compared to 1.8-3.5% for traditional dollar-based wire transfers. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button, because what I'm about to show you explains why this infrastructure is nearly impossible to compete with once it's established. When I interviewed a payment systems architect who worked on Thailand's integration with CIPS, he told me something that stuck with me. We're not replacing the dollar system. We're making it irrelevant for an entire category of transactions. That distinction matters enormously. Russia's case study shows you why. Yes, sanctions forced Russia to accelerate yuan adoption. 88% of Russia-China trade now settles in yuan and rubles, with the dollar essentially eliminated. But here's the uncomfortable truth that makes Western policymakers nervous. Russian businesses prefer this system even in non-sanctioned sectors. Why would they prefer it if sanctions were lifted tomorrow? Because the digital infrastructure China built with Russia isn't just sanction-proof, it's more efficient than what it replaced. Russian agricultural exporters can now receive payment in yuan, convert what they need to rubles through the Moscow exchange, and keep the rest in yuan for purchasing Chinese machinery. The entire process happens in one business day through integrated platforms. A wheat exporter in Rostov told me, before sanctions we waited 72 hours minimum for dollar settlements. Now it's same day and we save 2.1% on every transaction. Even if sanctions disappeared tomorrow, why would I go back? This is the paradox Western analysts keep stumbling over. Sanctions accelerated a transition to a system that many users find superior for reasons having nothing to do with sanctions. Let me give you the specific number that should worry dollar system defenders: 247. That's how many financial institutions across 112 countries are now direct participants in CIPS as of October 2024, up from 197 institutions in 85 countries just 12 months ago. Here's what nobody tells you about network effects in payment systems. There's a tipping point where the alternative system becomes self-reinforcing. Every new bank that joins makes it more attractive for the next bank to join. Every new currency corridor that opens makes the next corridor easier to establish. Are we at that tipping point? Honestly, I don't think so, not globally, but in specific trade corridors, particularly those involving Chinese commerce, we've absolutely crossed it. And this is where predictions become difficult, because what happens next depends on variables that are genuinely unpredictable. But let me pull this together and show you what the evidence actually suggests about where this heads. So let me pull this together and show you what this actually means for the next 3 to 5 years, because the framework we've just walked through, the infrastructure trap, the commodity anchor strategy, and the digital payment fortress, these aren't separate tactics. They're interconnected systems that reinforce each other in ways that make reversal extraordinarily difficult. Here's my opinion, and I'll be direct about this. We're not witnessing the end of dollar dominance globally. That's the sensationalist take that gets clicks but misses the reality. What we're witnessing is the emergence of what I call the dual circuit financial system. Think of it like this. The dollar remains dominant for deep capital markets, for holding reserves, for transactions that require maximum liquidity and legal certainty under Western frameworks. Nobody's replacing that function anytime soon, not with yuan, not with anything else, but for operational trade, for commodity transactions, for infrastructure financing in developing markets, and for regional commerce in Asia and increasingly in parts of Latin America and the Middle East. Yuan-based systems are becoming not just viable but preferred. Let me give you a question that I genuinely don't have a complete answer to. What happens when 40% of global trade by volume operates primarily in yuan, but 60% of global reserves remain in dollars? We've never seen that configuration before. The post-war system assumed the trade currency and the reserve currency would be the same thing. We might be heading into a world where they diverge, and honestly, nobody knows exactly how that system behaves under stress. Here's my prediction, and I want to be specific. By 2027, We'll see yuan-based settlement exceed 50% in at least 15 bilateral trade relationships that collectively represent over $2 trillion in annual commerce. I'm not predicting dollar collapse, I'm predicting continued methodical erosion in specific segments. The doubt I have, and this is important, is whether China can maintain the discipline required to keep this system stable. Currency dominance isn't just about adoption, it's about trust. The dollar became dominant because the US provided liquidity in crisis, maintained relatively predictable policy, and built deep capital markets that could absorb trillions in transactions. Can China do that? Will they accept the responsibilities that come with currency leadership, including sometimes acting against their immediate national interests to maintain system stability? I don't know. And based on conversations with Chinese economists who think deeply about this, they don't completely know either. Here's what should terrify us policymakers, though. Their current response is almost perfectly designed to accelerate what they're trying to prevent. Every additional sanctions regime, every attempt to weaponize SWIFT access, every restriction on dollar clearing, it validates China's argument that countries need alternatives. If I were advising Washington, which nobody's asking me to do, I'd say the competition isn't about blocking yuan adoption. It's about making dollar systems so efficient, so reliable, and so valuable that choosing them remains the rational choice even when alternatives exist. But that requires humility about where the current system is failing and investment in infrastructure that Washington hasn't shown much interest in funding. So here are 3 scenarios for how this plays out. Scenario 1, gradual bifurcation. Yuan dominates Asia to Asia and Asia to emerging market trade. Dollar remains supreme for transatlantic commerce and capital markets. We live in a genuinely multipolar financial system with regional spheres of influence. Scenario 2, Chinese financial crisis. Something breaks in China's property sector or banking system badly enough that yuan confidence collapses. Countries retreat to dollars despite the inefficiencies because trust trumps technology. Scenario 3, accelerated displacement. A major US policy mistake, maybe freezing China's treasury holdings, maybe extreme sanctions causes a rapid flight from dollars in emerging markets. The transition that was happening over a decade compresses into 3 years. My money's on scenario 1, but with wild cards that could shift us toward either extreme. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Currency dominance isn't binary. It's not dollar or yuan. The future is probably dollar and yuan, serving different functions in different regions for different purposes. The question that matters is which system you'll be participating in, and whether you're prepared for a world where financial infrastructure looks fundamentally different than it has for the last 70 years. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe because I'll be tracking these 5 economies monthly to see if this trend accelerates or stalls. And drop a comment, which scenario do you think is most likely and what am I missing in this analysis? The shift is silent, but it's not invisible if you know where to look.